Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So again, we're reading from 2nd Canto, Chapter 9, Text 10, and we'll start with the word by word. Pravartate,
Pravartate,
Yatra,
Yatra,
Rajatama,
Rajastama,
Tayo,
Tayo,
Sattvam,
Sattvam,
Cha,
Cha,
Mishram,
Mishram,
Na,
Na,
Cha,
Cha,
Kala,
Kara,
Vikramaha,
Vikrama,
Na,
Na,
Yatra,
Yatra,
Maya,
Maya,
Kim,
Kim,
Uta,
Uta,
Apare,
Apare,
Hare,
Hare,
Anuvrata,
Anuvrata,
Yatra,
Yatra,
Sura,
Sura,
Asura,
Asura,
Archita,
Archita,
Pravartate Yatra Rajastamasthayo,
Pravartate Rajasthamatayo,
Sattvam cha Misram na cha Kala Vikrama.
Sattvam Cham Shram
Okay. Na yatra maya kimuta parihare.
Naya Chamaya Kimuta Parihare.
Maybe I'm going the wrong melody here because it seems like we're all having difficulty. Anuvrata yatra sura surarchitaha.
Anuvrata Yatra Sura Surachita.
Pravartate yatra rajastamasatayo.
Pravartate Yatra Rajastamastayo.
Sattvam cha misram na cha kala vikramaha.
Sattvam Cham Vishram Nachakala Vikrama.
Na yatra maya kimuta parihare.
Naya Chamaya Kimuta Parihare.
Anuvrata yatra sura surarchita.
Anuvrata Yatra Sura Surachitaya.
There we go. Pravartate yatra rajastamastayo.
Pravartate Yatra Rajastamastayo.
Sattvam cha misram na chakala vikrama.
Sattvam Cham Vishram Nachakala Vikrama.
Na yatra maya kimuta parihare.
Nayatra Maya Kimuta Parihare.
Anuvrata yatra surarchita.
Anuvrata Yatra Surachita.
Pravartate yatra rajastamastayo.
Pravartate Yatra Rajastamastayo.
Sattvam cha misram na chakala vikrama.
Sattvam Shamishram Nachakala Vikrama.
Na yatra maya kimuta parihare.
Nayatra Maya Kimuta Parihare.
Anuvrata yatra surarchita.
Anuvrata Yatra Surachita. Pravartate Yatra Rajastamatayo.
Pravartate yatra rajastamastayo.
Sadvam Chamishwana Chakara Vikrama.
Sadvam chamisram nachakala vikrama.
Nayatra Maya Kimutu Utapare Are.
Nayatra maya kimuta pare hare.
Anuvrata Yatra Sura Chita.
Anuvrata yatra sura surarchita.
Pravartate yatra rajastamatamo.
Pravartate yatra rajastamastayo.
Sattvam cha misramna chachala vikramaha.
Sadvam chamisram nachakala vikrama.
Nayatra maya kim uttapare hare.
Nayatra maya kimuta pare hare.
Anuvratara yatra sura sura chita.
Anuvrata yatra surar surarchita. Would anybody else like to recite the verse?
Pravartate yatra rajastamastayo.
Pravartate yatra rajastamastayo.
Sadvam chamishram nacha kala vikramaha.
Sadvam chamisram nachakala vikrama.
Nayatra maya kimuta pare hare.
Nayatra maya kimuta pare hare.
Anuvrata yatra shirasura chita.
Anuvrata yatra surar surarchita.
Pravarte yatra yajasamastayo.
Pravartate yatra rajastamastayo.
Sattvam cha mishramna cha kala vikramaha.
Sadvam chamisram nachakala vikrama.
Nayatra maya kimuta pare hare.
Nayatra maya kimuta pare hare.
Anuvrata yatra sura sura chita.
Anuvrata yatra surar surarchita.
Pravartate yatra rajastamastayo.
Pravartate yatra rajastamastayo.
Sattvam cha mishram nachakala vikrama.
Sattvam chamisram nachakala vikrama.
Yatra maya kimuta parihare.
Nayatra maya kimuta pare hare.
Anuvrata yatra sura 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 chita.
Anuvrata yatra surar surarchita. Reading second canto, chapter 9, verse 10. Would anybody else like to recite the verse? Here in person, we have Mother Malini, we have Laura, Rohini, and Parampara. And online, you have everybody that you see there online. Right. So we have Leonard, Anandini, Ananta Shakti, Rama, Prabhupada's house with Lakshmi Priya. We have Rukmini, we have Kelly and George. Okay. Yes, thank you. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narothanmam devim sarvatim vyasam tato jayam udirayet. So let's go with the word-by-word translation. Pravartate. Prevail. Yatra. Wherein. Rajatama. The modes of ignorance and passion. Tayo. Both of them. Sattvam. The mode of goodness. Cha. And. Mishram. Mixture. Na. Never. Cha. And. Kala.
Kala.
time,
Time.
Vikrama,
Vikrama.
influence,
Influence.
na,
Na.
neither,
Neither.
yatra,
Yatra.
therein,
Therein.
maya,
Maya.
illusory external energy,
Illusory external energy.
kim,
Kim.
what,
What?
uta,
Uta.
there is,
There is.
apare,
Apare.
others,
Others.
hare,
Hare.
of the personality of Godhead,
Of the personality of Godhead.
anubrata,
Unubrata.
devotees,
Devotees.
yatra,
Yatra.
wherein,
Wherein.
sura,
Sura.
the demigods,
The demigods.
asura,
Asura.
the demons,
And the demons.
archita,
Are Chita.
worshipped.
Worshipped.
Translation. In that personal abode of the Lord, the material modes of ignorance and passion do not prevail, nor is there any of their influence in the matter of goodness. There is no predominance of the influence of time, so what to speak of the illusory external energy that cannot enter in that region. Without discrimination, both the demigods and the demons worship the Lord as devotees. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The kingdom of God, or the atmosphere of Vaikuntha nature, which is called the Tripad Vibhuti, is 3 times bigger than the material universes and is described here, as also in the Bhagavad Gita in a nutshell. This universe, containing billions of stars and planets, is one of the billions of such universes clustered together within the compass of Mahat Tattva. And all these millions and billions of universes combined together constitute only 1/4 of the magnitude of the whole creation of the Lord. There's the spiritual sky also. Beyond the sky, the spiritual planets are there under the names of Vaikuntha, and all of them constitute 3/4 of the entire creation of the Lord. God's creations are always innumerable. Even the leaves of a tree, the leaves of a tree cannot be counted by a man, nor the hairs on his head. However, foolish men are puffed up with the idea of becoming God himself, though unable to create a hair of their own bodies. Man may discover so many wonderful vehicles of journey, but even if he reaches the moon by his much advertised spacecraft, he cannot remain there. The sane man, therefore, without being puffed up, as if he were the God of the universe, abides by the instructions of the Vedic literature, the easiest way to acquire knowledge in transcendence. So let us know through the authority of Srimad Bhagavatam of the nature and constitution of the transcendental world beyond the material sky. In that sky, the material qualities, especially the modes of ignorance and passion, are completely absent. The mode of ignorance influences a living entity to the habit of lust and hankering, and this means that in the Vaikuntha lokas, the living entities are free from these 2 things. As confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Brahma Bhuta stage of life, one becomes free from hankering and lamentation. Therefore, the conclusion is that the inhabitants of the Vaikuntha planets are all Brahma Bhuta living entities, as distinguished from the mundane creatures who are all compact in hankering and lamentation. When one is not in the modes of ignorance and passion, one is supposed to be situated in the mode of goodness in the material world. Goodness in the material world also at times becomes contaminated with touches of the modes of passion and ignorance. In the Vaikuntha Loka, it is unalloyed goodness only. The whole situation there is one of freedom from the illusory manifestation of the external energy. Although illusory energy is also part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, still illusory energy is differentiated from the Lord. The illusory energy is not, however, false, as claimed by the monist philosophers. The rope accepted as a snake may be an illusion to a particular person, but the rope is a fact, and the snake is also a fact. The illusion of water on the hot desert may be illusion for the ignorant animal searching out water in the desert, but the desert and the water are actual facts. Therefore, the material creation of the Lord may be an illusion to the non-devotee class of men, but to the devotee, even the material creation of the Lord is a fact, as the manifestation of his external energy. But this energy of the Lord is not all. The Lord has his internal energy also, which has another creation known to be the Vaikuntha Lokas, where there is no ignorance, no passion, no illusion, and no past and present. With a poor fund of knowledge, one may be unable to understand the existence of such things as the Vaikuntha atmosphere, but that does not nullify its existence. That spacecraft cannot reach these planets does not mean that there are no such planets, for they are described in the revealed scriptures. As quoted by Srila Jiva Goswami, we can know from the Narada Pancharatra that the transcendental world or Vaikuntha atmosphere is enriched with transcendental qualities. These transcendental qualities, as revealed through the devotional service of the Lord, are distinct from the mundane qualities of ignorance, passion, and goodness. Such qualities are non-attainable by the non-devotee class of men. In the Padma Purana, Uttarakanda, it is stated that beyond the 1/4 part of God's creation, there is the 3/4 part of the part manifestation. The marginal line between the material manifestation and the spiritual manifestation is the Viraja river. And beyond the Viraja, which is a transcendental current flowing from the perspiration of the body of the Lord, there is the 3/4 part manifestation of God's creation. This part is eternal, everlasting, without any deterioration, and unlimited, and contains the highest perfectional stage of living conditions. In the Sankhya Kaumudi, it is stated that unalloyed goodness or transcendence is just opposite to the material modes. All living entities are eternally associated without any break, and the Lord is the chief and prime entity there. In the Agama Puranas, also, the transcendental abode is described as follows. The associated members there are free to go everywhere within the creation of the Lord, and there is no limit to such creation, particularly in the region of the 3/4 magnitude. Since the nature of that region is unlimited, there is no history of such association, nor is there end of it. The conclusion may be drawn that because of the complete absence of the mundane qualities of ignorance and passion, there is no question of creation nor annihilation. In the material world, everything is created and everything is annihilated, and the duration of life between the creation and annihilation is temporary. In the transcendental realm, there is no creation and no destruction, and thus the duration of life is eternal unlimitedly. In other words, everything in the transcendental world is everlasting, full of knowledge and bliss without any deterioration. Since there is no deterioration, there is no past, present, and future in the estimation of time. It is clearly stated in this verse that the influence of time is conspicuous by its absence. The whole material existence is manifested by actions and reactions of elements which make the influence of time prominent in the matter of past, present, and future. There are no such actions and reactions of cause and effects there, so the cycle of birth, growth, existence, transformations, deterioration, and annihilation, or the 6 material changes, are not existent there. It is the unalloyed manifestation of the energy of the Lord without any illusion as experienced here in the material world. The whole Vaikuntha existence proclaims that everyone there is a follower of the Lord. The Lord is the chief leader there without any competition of leadership, and the people in general are all followers of the Lord. It is confirmed in the Vedas, therefore, that the Lord is the chief leader and all other living entities are subordinate to him, as only the Lord satisfies all the needs of all other living entities. Jai. So what a mouthful there. Lots of goodness to unpack. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. So as always, I'm always captivated by talking about the billions and millions and trillions and quadrillions of planets and stars and universes, and how so all of the billions and millions of planets in our one universe, that's already like hard for me to comprehend. Somewhere in the purport, Prabhupada describes how it's hard for the mundane person to understand the atmosphere of Vaikuntha because it's so magnanimous, and kind of like for me it's so hard even to consider the vastness of one material universe, which is one of billions, and even all of the billions aggregate to 1/4 of the total creation. So for me it's like this visual of I'm trying to wrap this really big gift, and I have like a candy wrapper, and it's like so small, me trying to cover the whole thing, and maybe it's impossible. Maybe a pure devotee can understand it. To me, it's so inconceivable, even just on the material platform. Yes, so the entire material creation, the Tripad Vibhuti, that's the Vaikuntha nature, the counterpart of the Tripad Vibhuti, I don't remember its name. This is all in the compass of the Mahatattva. And the Mahatattva, this is created by Mahavishnu, who also goes by Karanadakashai Vishnu, or a new name I learned, Karanabdishai Vishnu. And he is called the super soul of everything. And that's actually another name for the Viraja river that was named, this river between the material and spiritual world. Another name for this is the causal ocean. And I'm not so clear if there's different causal oceans, but Prabhupada describes it as the causal ocean. And so I find it kind of trippy, right? So there's this Karanadakashai Vishnu, and he lies on this causal ocean, and then he begins to create all of these universes, all of these planets, and then expands as Garbhodakashai Vishnu, and then enters those planets, and then creates all of the variegatedness of life, and then expands again and enters each of those things as Kshirodakashai Vishnu. So I think it's kind of it's like this meta mind meld, where we have Mahavishnu called the super soul of everything. We have Garbhodakashai Vishnu called the subtle super soul, and then Kshirodakashai Vishnu or Paramatma, that is the gross super soul. So that's something new that I learned in researching this verse, that there are different names for different kinds of super souls, not just Paramatma. Yes. So continuing, right? So this verse is talking so much about the Vaikuntha atmosphere, the Vaikuntha planets, which have many kinds of descriptions. And one such description of the spiritual sky, which is what this verse references throughout, it's that it's shaped like a lotus flower, and there's the center. That's where Krishna's planet is, where Goloka Vrindavan is. And then on the petals of the lotus flower are the infinite Vaikuntha lokas. A different description that I found is that all of the Vrindavan, the Vrindavan forest covers something like, I think it was 32 miles altogether, and that all of the infinite Vaikuntha planets, all of the Vaikuntha creation is somewhere in like a corner of that. So that's like one of those things where like when Mother Yashoda is looking to Krishna's mouth and sees everything within Krishna's mouth. For me, it's kind of like this. All of the infinity of everything exists in like a corner of Vrindavan. I'm not sure how to make sense of it, but that's apparently how it goes. Yes, just like in the previous description of Karanadakashai Vishnu, and then inside of all of those things is Garbhodakashai Vishnu, and inside all of those things is Kshirodakashai Vishnu. But then also Krishna is absolute, so everything is inside of the super soul also. For me, it's like this. It's very trippy to try to make sense of it all. And so for me, this verse also points about humility. Right? I was mentioning how it's difficult for me to even consider the entire material creation, but I don't even have to go that big to be humbled. Like Prabhupada mentions here, even the leaves of a tree can't be counted by a man. And when I first read that, I was like, well, of course they can. They could very patiently sit there and count them and maybe pluck them off. And okay, like with any like reasonable level of ease or quickness, it would be impossible for any common human being to count either the leaves or the blades of grass or the hairs on anybody's head. And so for me, this points to humility, because we're the so-called knower of our own body, but kind of like Prabhupada points, like who knows how many how many hairs they have on their head, or how many pores they have on their body. And so we're like somewhat the knower of one body, and then there's Krishna, who is the true knower of all the bodies, whether we consider the body a human body or an animal body or a planet body or an atom body, right? That Krishna enters every body, and not just the animate bodies, but the inanimate bodies too, or at least the seemingly inanimate bodies. And so he's the true knower. And so this is one such way, because Prabhupada talks about the puffed up people who want to become God. And I've recently encountered someone who consumes lots of substances, and kind of like my sense from how they speak is that, yeah, kind of they think that they are either God or on their way to being God, or maybe on the similar platform. And they talk about how they're the ones creating the thunderstorms, or if the plants are growing, they're the ones creating this. And yeah, I mean, it was challenging talking to the person, mostly because most of what they were saying didn't make sense to me. But this is for me like such a direct example of like, okay, so then how many hairs do you have on your head? Because I mean, I don't know either, but God definitely knows. You know, not a blade of grass moves without the sanction of God, and not a single hair grows, as an analogy, without the sanction of God also. So I really like this this way to look at humility, of, because I mean, I certainly try to think of myself as like the center, kind of like at the end of the purport. Prabhupada talks about how in the Vaikuntha lokas, Krishna is the chief leader, and there's no tinge of competition. And I really like this, because I find it really exhausting, really even competing with other human beings. I mean, like where I sometimes have a chance of actually competing, or like, you know, being the top dog somehow. But it's still exhausting to try to do this. And so I found it so relieving, because I mean, I also try to compete with Krishna. Not that I have a chance, I'm like the underdog, right? But so I try to do it anyway, and it's really exhausting. And so to read that in Vaikuntha Loka, it's not just that Krishna is the top dog, saying that with all respect, but that there's no competition. That sounds so lovely to me. It sounds so relieving. And somebody was recently telling me about this dog training show that they were watching, and I was like, oh, I wonder what that's like for the dogs, like to have, you know, somebody training them or commanding them. Like, what about like maybe their freedom or whatever? And the person explained that they think they like it because they just kind of follow the orders of the alpha in the pack, who's the human. And kind of this, I didn't so much make sense of it when that person explained it, but reading in this, I can see how that could be relieving for the dog, to have like an alpha kind of just telling them what to do, and to have Krishna as the chief leader of the pack. I'm like, oh wow, that would be nice, kind of just to not compete, but just to follow the guidance, whatever that is. And so that's something that I really liked about this verse. Yes, and then Prabhupada talks about how Prabhupada actually he talks about me quite a few times in the verse to make myself significant again, right? So he names how we might negate the existence of something that we don't understand, right? Prabhupada writes, with a poor fund of knowledge, one may be unable to understand the existence of such things as the Vaikuntha atmosphere, but that does not nullify its existence. And then that spacecraft cannot reach these planets does not mean that there are no such planets, for they are described in the revealed scriptures. And so for me, that sentence there, or the part of the sentence, that does not nullify its existence. For me, it points to this mental fallacy that I know I can identify with, and maybe some of you can too, I'm not sure, that, okay, to the extent I don't understand something, then I just like sort of don't believe it or want to disregard it because I like to understand things. And so for me, it's easy to want to negate almost everything that we read in Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam, because I like 99.99% of it, I don't get it, or it's like too big, right, for my little candy wrapper of a mind to try to wrap my mind around these things. So So Prabhupada here, he's directly calling out, just because you don't get it doesn't mean it's not there. And then that made me think of how we have in the planet, we have like these deepest parts of the ocean that we don't understand. Like, I forget the statistic, maybe it's like 5% of the ocean we've explored, and then like 90 or 95% we haven't. We don't know what is there. And then I like this example for me because, well, we can pretty logically conclude that the bottom of the ocean has to be there in order for the top of the ocean to be there. Like, otherwise the top of the ocean would just fall to the bottom. And so this for me can explain how, okay, even though we don't understand it, obviously it doesn't cease to exist. It doesn't make the bottom of the ocean disappear just because we don't understand it, just because we don't get it. And so this sort of pacified my mind that, okay, maybe there can be things that exist that Eze doesn't understand. Ooh, yeah, it's a stretch, but sort of I can begin to consider that. And then, okay, so we're talking about the ocean, right? The causal ocean, and I mentioned how at least in different purports, different verses that I found, that's another name for the Viraja river. And I liked reading about the Viraja river. I know I've heard about it in different classes, how on one side is the material world, and on the other side is the spiritual world. On one side is Yoga Maya, on the other side is maybe Maha Maya, the material Maya, how there's always Maya. And so then we're reading here, right, that this the river is flowing from the perspiration of the body of the Lord. So again, that's like another layer of trippiness, right? Because we have, I don't know which body of the Lord, I couldn't find which body of the Lord, but we have some body of the Lord, and that creates perspiration. And then already on a byproduct of one of the bodies of the Lord, we have the first Vishnu that we're familiar with, that I mentioned earlier, the Mahavishnu. And then on another byproduct of the body of that Lord, we have the universes. And so like this, and then the next layer of Kshirodakashai Vishnu. And so for me, this is already, it's so inconceivable for me to think like the Lord's byproducts of his body are obviously very different from the byproducts of our own bodies. Like most, if not all, of the byproducts of our own material bodies kind of are considered unpleasant. And so this was my first reaction when I read, oh, wow, a river of perspiration. I was like, that's kind of gross. But then as I sat with it, I was like, well, okay, it's not like my perspiration. It's not the perspiration of a human. It's the perspiration of God. And so I was like, I don't know, maybe that's like honey or nectar or something. Like it's probably pleasant in some way. And so this was also nice for me to consider that it's, because my tendency is to want to put others, whether people or Krishna, on my own platform, right, on my own bodily conception of, ew, perspiration. That's gross. I don't want to be a river of perspiration of anybody. But yeah, this for me really helps me to challenge my perception, my bodily conception, because I hear like, okay, Krishna is not different from his form, is not different from his name, is not different from his body. I'm like, sure, whatever. He's not different, but that's still gross. And so this really challenges me as I sat with it. Like, no, okay, let me try to consider that it's actually wonderful. It's actually like somebody would want to swim there more than in the Yamuna or in the Ganges or whatever, any other sacred river. Like this is the topmost sacred river because it's flowing not just from the spiritual planets, but directly from the body of the Lord. I don't know if this would be accurate to say, but it's okay, since the name of the Lord, the form of the Lord, the body of the Lord are non-different, maybe this river, which is like an extension of his body, maybe it's also non-different. That's just my speculation. Prabhupada didn't necessarily say that, because it's a counter argument for what I just said. Lord Chaitanya describes the Viraja river in Brahmaloka, even though that they're beyond the grossest part of the material existence. he still describes them as external. So it's the stage where there's a negation of what we traditionally associate with the material world, but they're still not, they're not in the realm, they're not quite in the realm of the spiritual world. They're not quite in the realm of the Vaikuntha lokas. And so because there's simply a dissolution of the material, Lord Chaitanya describes that it's a place where those with an impersonal inclination tend to go. They tend to want to go into that river or into Brahmaloka, because there's a what is it? There's it's Lord Chaitanya describes those two, the Viraja River and the Brahmaloka, as shelters for living entities that are disgusted with material life and inclined to impersonal existence. So not that Lord Chaitanya necessarily condemns these places, but he still points out that they're still external. They're still not the ultimate goal. But then if somehow finally, by the grace of God, we make it to the other side, and like good God, there's so many steps to actually get there, right? Okay, you have like whatever the billions and trillions of miles of the 7 layers covering the material world, and then describe like the bhakti of Creeper breaches through all of those and climbs through all the different layers of the material, somehow makes it past Brahmaloka, makes it past the river, and then okay, finally, if or when you make it to the spiritual world, then there's absolutely no influence, as Prabhupada describes in the purport, no influence of the material modes, and no influence of time. And it's interesting to me how Prabhupada describes, he says, since there's no in the purport here that we read, since there's no deterioration, there's no past, present, and future in the estimation of time. So this got me thinking how it's interesting that one of the functions, not necessarily it's one of the primary functions, but one of the functions that we can use time is to describe, sort of to try to describe this temporary period between when something begins and when something dies, whether it's like, oh, how long did it last, or how long was it, whether we're talking about a song or a movie or the life of someone, how this process of decay encourages the need for time to be able to describe that temporariness. And so how, again, since there's no deterioration, there's no past, there's no present, and there's no future. Not that I get it, but I found that interesting, how deterioration, at least in this purport, Prabhupada names as the reason for how come there is time, and then the lack of deterioration, Prabhupada names as the lack of time, as in like how long does it take for something to deteriorate between when it comes to exist and when it comes to desist. And then finally, at the end of the actual translation, Prabhupada writes that without discrimination, both the demigods and the demons worship the Lord. So this is how we were talking about, that there's no influence of ignorance, there's no influence of passion, and there's no material goodness either, because Prabhupada makes a distinction that in material goodness, this can become tainted also. Somewhere he writes it can be touched by the modes of. So Prabhupada writes, goodness in the material world also at times becomes contaminated with touches of the modes of passion and ignorance. And so in the Vaikuntha lokas, it's unalloyed goodness. It's Shuddha Sattva only. And so I asked Malini about the end of the verse here. Without discrimination, both the demigods and demons worship the Lord. And then through talking, what I came to understand, which seemed like she accepted as valid, is that, okay, so because demons, they are more or less influenced by the mode of ignorance. Demigods are more or less influenced by the mode of passion. There's so many stories about demigods coming down to more or less sleep with women in the material world and whatever. And anyway, so that they're influenced by the mode of passion. And so since there are no modes of passion or ignorance or material goodness, my understanding is that anybody who, if they would be in the material world or if they would be in a lower stage, whether they would be covered by the mode of ignorance, by the mode of passion, by some combination, or even by material goodness, since none of those exist, then they remain in their pure form, because ultimately everybody is a devotee. And we can think of pastimes like with Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, have their Jai and Vijay. So ultimately they are devotees of the Lord. And okay, in their case, they came down and they became covered by the mode of ignorance, and they played the role of demons. But ultimately, and then this was true for when they came back, then they remain in their true form, in their constitutional position as devotees. And okay, we can also take the example, even if somebody comes down and they have some role that's higher than the role of a demon, whether they're a Brahmin or whether they're a Kshatriya or whatever, even if they're not in any of those, but they're not a demon or a demigod, that ultimately whatever the role, if we remove the material roles, and if we remove the material influence that would put us into those roles, then we're ultimately always in the form of a devotee. That's the true form. And then at the end of the purport, Prabhupada said something that I personally really like. I already mentioned how I like the idea of Krishna being the alpha, the alpha dog, and I'm like a regular dog. Not to call Krishna a dog, but Krishna is the chief, and I'm just like a non-chief person. But the other part that I really like is at the last sentence, as the Lord satisfies all the needs of us, only the Lord satisfies all the needs of all living entities. And some or maybe all of you know that I'm really involved with this work called nonviolent communication. And one of the central points of nonviolent communication is the focus on needs, not just like physical needs, but it expands the realm or the concept of needs to include things like love or communication, spiritual communion, respect, etc. And something that I've heard Dira say many times is that any field, any practice, any principle finds its perfection and completion in bhakti. And so for me, this is the same is true, right? That I consider the same is true with NVC, with nonviolent communication, that ultimately the Lord is the only one that can satisfy all the needs of all living entities. We might be able to satisfy some needs for one another, but that really Krishna is the only one that can satisfy all of our needs. So I'll read the translation again, and I'll not read the verse because I forgot which tune we use, so I'll just go to the translation. So in that personal abode of the Lord, the material modes of ignorance and passion do not prevail, nor is there any of their influence in the matter of goodness. There is no predominance of the influence of time, so what to speak of the illusory external energy that cannot enter that region? Without discrimination, both the demigods and the demons worship the Lord as devotees. So Hare Krishna, I welcome questions, comments, complaints, concerns, any form of speech.
Fun class.
Fun class.
Yeah. I really like it. Thank you.
You were humorously stimulated.
Yes. Both, like the understanding of the material energy and transformation and creation, and then the existence of something that we cannot really touch with our material mind and intelligence because it's a candy wrapper, and still, like the ability to describe that place.
Hare Krishna. There's some comments. Leonard says, I know how many hairs are on my head. 0. And so Anandini says, you must be God then. And then Leonard continues, yes, Eze and I hold that position jointly. Thank you for sharing, Leonard. Yes. Thank you, Leonard. And then Anandini continues, God has many forms. So I think she's in support now that, yes, she's agreeing. Hare Krishna. Yes. Any other comments, questions, jokes?
Yeah, well, I'll share that. You had lots of questions, actually. Lots of questions come up, lots of stimulating.
Sorry, Eze.
Yes.
Well, I don't hear.
Sure. I'll turn here.
So, yeah, I had lots of questions, kind of curiosities and things that I've been thinking about. I'll just stick with the one that's in the actual verse that you spoke about is, so yeah, the idea of the Shuddha Sattva, pure Sattva, material, Sattva, material modes of material nature. So I had this, maybe a different conception or a previous conception, or maybe there's just different conceptions and it's like, simultaneous oneness and different, differentness. So maybe originally I had the conception of there's the material modes of nature, sattva, rajas, and tamas, and that's material. And then there's something spiritual that's transcendental to the modes of material nature. And so to me, that was like a different category. It was like, it's not just sattva, not just pure sattva, not just sattva without the material, without passion and ignorance. It's another category. It's transcendence, and then I heard like a different conception of just like, okay, so transcendence, or, there's a pure sattva, Shuddha Sattva, that's spiritual. That's like of the spiritual world. And it just means that there's no passion and ignorance. Shuddha Sattva is just, there's no passion and ignorance, because in the material world, there's always some contamination of passion and ignorance. So that if there is no passion and ignorance, then that's pure sattva, and that is spiritual, that is transcendental. And to me, that it's there's a distinction there, and I think it makes, at least in my mind, it kind of brings it into a different level, because then it makes me, because I was imagining the boundary, there's a boundary between the spiritual and the material world, the Viraja River. I was imagining a more hard boundary between the spiritual and material worlds. It's a different category, it's transcendental, it's not touched by anything, But with that conception of just, okay, you can get just pure spiritual transcendence just by eliminating the passion and the ignorance, then it seems to me more of like a spectrum of like that there's not a real hard boundary, and that you can kind of just it brings up doubt, actually, because it seems that like, because okay, spiritual world is not another category, spiritual world is not something else, it's just you can attain it just by going along this, but this is kind of just in my head. It's hard for me to put it out, but and so then it makes me think of it brings my mind to the actual geography of the spiritual material worlds. Okay, is it really that the Vaikuntha planets are in a spiritual world that's a separate category, or is it just that there's just a plane of existence? And that we're, as you get more purified, you just go up, and that, is it that the Vaikuntha planets are just more heavenly? Are they actually transcendental, or are they just more heavenly than the regular heavenly planets we think of? And you go to the topmost heavenly planet, and it's really just a spectrum, but we put a differentiation there. So anyway, this is where my mind, this is something that's been on my mind that your class sparked. So, but just to bring it back to the, at least a concrete place to focus on, it seems to me, at least for me to understand, it's helpful to see that there's a different category beyond just pure sattva, that there's something that's transcendental that is not even touched by sattva. That's helpful for my mind. Maybe that's not the case, but at least that's kind of what I was understanding, is that there's something transcendental that is not even touched by sattva. That is just another category, because and it seems there is, because if we're really in devotional service and acting, putting Krishna in the center, we may do something that's not good, but it is good because it's for Krishna. It's not like, so anyway, I'm kind of going around in circles, but that's the question: is there something transcendental to even Shuddha-sattva, or is Shuddha-sattva the transcendental position, like the absolute transcendental position? That's my question.
Okay, Hare Krishna. Yeah, I appreciate hearing like how this brings doubt, like having the clear distinction that's like maybe like pacifying or easier. And when you think of it as like a gradient rather than like the line, you sort of do some blending and you go from black to white with some gray in the middle, then kind of it brings some doubt for you.
Right.
Yeah, and so like my understanding, and I'm very open to be corrected. My understanding is, like even what we call sattva from our material conception is, it's still some what's the word, like some perverted, some distorted, some polluted conception. Just like we talked in a class recently, how everything that is in the effect has to be in the cause. So kind of the way that I think of it is, whether we call it pure sattva, Shuddha-sattva, transcendence, the more spiritual thing, kind of for me it makes sense. There's a way of being that doesn't include any of the things that we do here in the material world, which Prabhupada categorizes as the material modes of, well, not just Prabhupada, but Krishna categorizes as the material modes of nature. So yeah, I mean, for me it's both, and it's like both the negation of those things, and then of course there's the bhakti, there's the love, there's the love for Krishna, because in a way we can say we could cultivate a sattvic lifestyle without having love for Krishna. Like if we just take all of the principles, say forget the prasadam, or forget the deity worship or chanting, but living a very clean lifestyle, eating healthy food, whatever, going to sleep early, waking up, you can have, maybe it's not pure goodness, you could have so much material goodness, but that for me still misses the point. It's kind of like the excerpt that I read from Lord Chaitanya, that even if you get to the Viraja river or Brahmaloka, you can more or less transcend the modes of material nature, but you still don't have, you still haven't crossed over into that. You're like sort of in the limbo. You've gotten rid of the material, but you haven't attached to the spiritual. That's how I'm seeing at least one way to look at your question. I don't know if that necessarily satisfies your doubt.
Maybe something I just need to realize and sit with. But
Malini wants to speak.
Well, okay, done. I want to support what you're saying. Often Srila Prabhupada says, in the material realm there is no sattva. That's the truth. It's called sattva, but there is no sattva. That in the material realm, sattva is always contaminated with the lower modes. And then so that Shuddha-sattva in a sense doesn't exist within the material realm. That's it. And then the Shuddha-sattva is also called Vasudev. It's a Vasudev platform from where we can go to Krishna, but not necessarily either. Because pure goodness is not the end, it's just the beginning of spiritual life. And it's not necessarily even entering into a relationship with Krishna. So that's how Prabhupada described it. And both, sometimes there is a continuum of like Brahmaloka, and even sometimes Brahmaloka is described as spiritual, and sometimes it's described as material. So I think there is both. It's not one or a gradation or a limit.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's and it's also a consciousness and a geography at both at the same time. And at the same time, in a purport, is described like 3/4 of the spiritual sky is under Shuddha-sattva without any tinge of material existence whatsoever. And 1/4 of the spiritual sky is under the cloud of Mahatattva, and illusion and ignorance there, where the modes of material nature are getting activated by our illusion. So in a sense, it's one spiritual sky. So within that spiritual sky, we are, and we can plug into Suddha Sattva here because we are within the spiritual sky. So like it's both of your conceptions are described, not one or the other.
Right.
And then the Viraja river from the Bhagavad Gita, we learn the Viraja river is a river of desire. So what really makes the difference between being in Sattva or being Suddha Sattva is our desire. How much our desire are only to please Krishna and nothing else. And how much our desire are still contaminated with I and my conception.
Like imagine, could it be that it's like the sattva we experience in the material world that's still tinged with passion and ignorance, that's like the doorway. And then on the other side of the door is Suddha Sattva. And it's not that that's the ultimate, that's the starting of the spiritual, the transcendental consciousness. And then, so there's like, I can imagine that. There's a boundary and there's a door, there's a threshold. So the threshold is like, and then on this side is, this door, on this side is, the sattva that we experience, and then Suddha Sattva is on the other side. That makes
And
sense.
to aim at Sattva, it's not necessarily the process either. Sattva is more conducive to go to the door. However, from anywhere where we are at, and that's what's beautiful from the Narada Pancharatra, which is stated here. From the Narada Pancharatra, it's not like we have to aim at Sattva. Our goal is not to come to the platform of Sattva. Our goal is to come to the platform of pure devotional service, which is not the same. And from wherever we are at, according to Narada Pancharatra, we can go there. We don't need to first, because the Daivi, like the Varnashram system is to elevate life after life. You elevate your mode to the point that you come to the Brahman, Sattvic, and then a life again. But that it's all flushed away by Narada Muni really, by from wherever we're at. We are in the as Kali Yoga dwells. Sattva is just we can put it in the garbage in a sense, but we can really serve Krishna if we wish to. So like our mind, it's the best platform, and that's not the goal. And to not focus there while also cultivating Sattva, the mix of the two.
Narada Panchatrika?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it's not, from what you're sharing, I don't know if this is accurate, but I feel like it's not necessarily like steps on a ladder. It can be very like permeable. Like it doesn't have to be that, my next step is sattva, and then my next step is this. It's like, it's so much more fluid than that, and it's not.
We can reach Krishna from anywhere we are. That's the difference with what we receive. And that's why Narada Muni is so present at the beginning of the Bhagavatam, because he's the spiritual master of Vyasadeva, and he instructed Vyasadeva to give us the Bhagavatam, because he knows Narada Muni was born from such a low family, there was no chance of sattva for him, but because he serves the Bhakti Vedantas, because he served them, because he was right there listening to them and serving them, then he went to a very low level of living, the lowest of the lowest, to spiritual enlightenment and service to Krishna.
It gives me some sense of hope, like that maybe, because when I think about it in a more of that process of steps, I feel like forget it. Like there's no way. But when I think about it in that way, it really, wow, like in an instant, Like it can just, it's like you can receive so much mercy
It can be an
in
instant.
just an instant.
Yeah.
And
That's what Prabhupada described, and Prabhupada says what he's giving us. And at the same time, we want to endeavor for sattva.
yes,
But sattva is not the goal, and it's not, our attention. Our attention is to serve and please the Lord. To serving the Bhaktivedanta. Yeah, there's a lot of hope for us. Otherwise, in the daily, system, Daivika system, there's no much hope. We just need to take birth again and again and elevate ourselves again and again, and then each birth there is a possibility of being completely deviated somewhere else. And arriving at sattva, there is even more risk because sattva is so much illusion of happiness.
That's more hopeful for me. The step by step is more hopeful for me. I think there's no way I can go straight to the thing. I hope next birth I get a more suitable conditions. Like
Well, that's true too.
that's all I can hope for. Right?
Yeah,
That's interesting. The different hope.
But I think that's true too. Like to think like, okay, well, in this life I work very hard as much as I can to make myself a better devotee in my next life. That in my next life I will have a better chance to come to serve the Lord without any tinge of material motivation.
Krishna. And what I'm hearing in both of those that you're sharing is so much about how sincerity plays a role, whether it's like sincere enough to make the instant transformation or sincere enough to say, well, maybe, or I'm working so that next time I'm a little bit closer and I have better conditions, a better chance. For me, it's like really about sincerity in both of those cases. Hare Krishna, any other questions or comments?
I think I have more.
Oh yeah.
Let's see, Anandini, you wanted to say something that we can come back to Parampara?
I can ask later.
No, you can go now.
Okay. Well, thank you for your class. I felt entertained, and also I really love these descriptions about the universe. It helps me to connect with humility, to connect with I'm so tiny compared to this whole universe, and still, like humility in a strong a humility that feels very powerful, and because Krishna is taking care of me personally, even though I'm so tiny.
Mm-hmm.
And hearing Parampara's question about sattva and Shuddha sattva, I was thinking how there are unlimited distinctions, it seems. And like reading Srimad Bhagavatam, I get that there are more distinctions than I thought. And now thinking about it more, there must be, I'm probably seeing, understanding just a very small part of all these distinctions. And you were speaking about these different types of Paramatma. I never heard this before. It's new, and it makes total sense.
Yeah, I like in a way like the two sharing. So you're saying, wow, they're like the universe is so big, and like I'm so small, and I get like part of that is that you're encouraged that Krishna loves you and is taking care of you, even though you're so tiny. And then in the same way, like, oh wow, there's so much knowledge, and like, wow, and my understanding is so small. There's probably so many more distinctions out there. I'm hearing like that thread of humility in what you're sharing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and this idea of the different kinds of super souls, the super soul of everything, the subtle super soul, and the gross super soul. You hear that's like an interesting point for you. It was for me too.
Yes, very. And I was actually thinking if there is like if we are all accompanied by super soul, and whether all these super souls have individual names too. That was just a thought I had.
A fun curiosity that I have no answer to.
Yeah. And I don't need a response. It's just an interest. It's interesting to have the question.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting to have the question, and maybe like kind of my sense is, kind of like how, I mean, Krishna has many names, but Krishna is Krishna. That would be my intuition, that Paramatma, yeah, is Paramatma. Whether it's Krishna in Vrindavan or Krishna in Goloka Vrindavan or Krishna wherever else Krishna goes, that he's Krishna. I don't know, my understanding or my intuition, maybe it's not so much understanding, would be that whether Paramatma goes into Anandini's heart or into Malini's heart or Parampara's heart, that's still the same Paramatma.
Thank you.
Parampara?
Yeah, after I said that was my main thing, that was what I shared. But I will just mention that when Prabhupada's speaking about illusory energy, and he says the rope accepted as a snake may be an illusion to a particular person, but the rope is a fact and the snake is also a fact. I've heard that so many times, and I never really got it. And I've asked about it before and kind of got more, and I kind of like, oh, okay, I think I understand. It's this very simple thing. It's actually very simple, but for whatever reason, I never could really grasp the fullness of it. And whenever we read it today, it was like, oh, something about the way, I was able to understand it on a deeper level. So I was appreciating that. And I just have a question about, this is God's creation. So I think of creation like the material creation, but Prabhupada's also calling like the spiritual world, the three forces, he's calling that creation, God's creation. And we hear about material creation. So I wonder about this word creation. I always think like there should be another word for it, or another, existence maybe.
It's very unusual. I noticed that in the purport too.
Okay.
And in the rest of the purport, so Srila Prabhupada said, of course, there is no creation.
Yeah.
There's no, in the moment, creation means beginning and end. And in the spiritual world, there is no such a thing. So he clarified later on, but it was an interesting word that I also noticed.
But could we say just all of existence? Or would that, is the spiritual world even
manifestation?
Is it a manifestation? The spiritual world?
It's his manifestation, is him expanding himself constantly. Through his desire for every time, Krishna's desire, it expands the all existence and universe and spiritual sky to his own desire. So sort of everything. But that's really unusual, the way Prabhupada used that word creation for the whole entire spiritual existence, the whole of existence.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anybody else? Haribol, would you share the reference for the types of super soul? Yes, I can do that. I'll need to backtrack and find it, but yeah, I'm happy to share that. Okay, Hare Krishna. Thank you all. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Prabhupada ki
Jai.